Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time I'm going to talk about the expiry of secure boot certificates in June and October 2026. This is unlikely to cause problems for most users, but it does affect the vast majority of computers running Windows 11 or Windows 10, as well as Linux installations that use secure boot. And so, in this video, I'm going to explain what's happening and what you may potentially need to do. Secure boot is a security feature included in the motherboard UEFI firmware of most desktops and laptops. Its purpose is to ensure that a computer only boots using software that's trusted by its original equipment manufacturer or which comes from a trusted software provider such as Microsoft. When a computer is powered up, Secure Boot checks the signatures of each piece of pre-boot software, including firmware drivers and the operating system bootloader. And if these signatures are validated against a database of trusted certificates, the PC boots and control is passed to the operating system. Secure boot therefore prevents malware such as a rootkit from loading when a computer starts. Secure boot relies on digital certificates stored in a computer's non-volatile memory or NVRAM. Microsoft first issued Secure Boot certificates in 2011. However, in June and October 2026, these initial certificates will expire and need to be replaced. Computers manufactured in 2024 and onwards potentially already have the new Microsoft certificates, but most computers require an update. Here we can see the 3 certificates that are going to expire, which appear on 4 rows because the last one is being replaced by 2 others. And all 4 of the replacement certificates were created in 2023. Note that in the certificate names, CA stands for Certificate Authority, and indeed what we're talking about is sometimes referred to as the transition from CA 2011 to CA 2023. Some expiring certificates are stored in DB, which refers to the Secure Boot Authorized Signature database. Meanwhile, the first certificate is stored in the KEK. This refers to the key enrollment key database, which stores signing keys which are trusted to make database changes. 2 such databases exist, the DB Authorized Signature database, as I've just mentioned, and DBX, which is a database of blacklisted forbidden signatures. The first expiring certificate, Microsoft Corporation KEK-CA 2011, controls changes to the allowed and blacklisted signature databases. Meanwhile, the second, the Microsoft Windows Production PCA or Product Control Authority 2011 certificate, signs the bootloader for Windows itself. The final expiring certificate is called Microsoft UEFI CA 2011 and is being replaced by 2 new ones. The first of these will sign third-party bootloaders. Meanwhile, the second will sign third-party option ROMs, which are firmware drivers contained in hardware such as GPUs or network controllers. So, what Microsoft is doing during renewal is facilitating finer control by splitting its third-party certificate in 2. The Secure Boot certificates listed in this table are required on a Windows PC. However, most Linux distros that support Secure Boot achieve this by using an intermediate bootloader called a shim, which is signed by the Microsoft UEFI certificate. And the KEK certificate is also used by Linux for database updates. Linux distros do this because most motherboard manufacturers only install Microsoft certificates, and so their expiry affects computers running both Windows and Linux. So, what's happening in June 2026 and what action may be required? Well, starting with Windows, here we're on the relevant Microsoft page, which I'll link in the video description. If we scroll down to the Impact section, we see that devices that haven't received the new 2023 certificate will continue to start and operate normally, and standard Windows updates will continue to install. However, these devices will no longer be able to receive new security protections for the early boot process. This makes it clear that certificate expiration should only impact security rather than computer operation. However, there is a caveat which we'll come to in a second. The good news is that most Windows computers will receive the updated Secure Boot certificates automatically. Specifically, if you are running Windows 11 Home, Pro or Education, you should receive the new certificates in the background via Windows Update. Meanwhile, if you are running Windows 10 Home, Pro or Education, you should get the new certificates automatically if you are enrolled for Extended Security Updates or ESUs. This all noted, when and even if you will get the new Secure Boot certificates automatically can depend on your hardware and how up to date its UEFI firmware happens to be. In addition, back here on the Microsoft page, if we scroll up and click on Windows devices for home users, businesses and schools with Microsoft managed updates, and then on the resultant page scroll down to troubleshooting, we can see that in a few cases your device might not start, or you might experience a BitLocker recovery situation when receiving the new certificates. As the page then details, in the first of these situations, the fix is to disable Secure Boot. You can do this by holding down the appropriate key to enter your computer's UEFI interface during boot, and then selecting the appropriate option. Which key to press depends on your computer, but it's often Escape, Delete, or F2. And once in the UEFI interface, Secure Boot is usually an option under Security, where it can be turned on or off as required. To check if a computer has received automatic certificate updates, we can look in the Windows Security app. In Windows 11 and Windows 10, this can often be accessed by clicking on the security icon on the taskbar. However, if, as on this system, the icon is not set to display, go to Search and start typing Security, which should bring up Windows Security, so you can click on it. Once in the Windows Security app, next click on Device Security. Here, if Secure Boot is activated, you'll find an entry for it under which a range of possible messages may be displayed. And if, as here, this reads Secure Boot is on and all required certificate updates have been applied, no further certificate changes are needed, then everything has already updated automatically and all is OK. However, you may not see this message. And to demonstrate, let's go back in time on this computer, which 6 days ago displayed Secure Boot is on, preventing malicious software from loading when your device starts up. And whilst this sounds reassuring, it's not good news, as it means that Windows has not been updated to display the latest Secure Boot certificate status, and you almost certainly do not have the new Secure Boot certificates. To explain, in April 2026, Microsoft started rolling out an update to the Windows Security app, which refined its reporting of Secure Boot states. And we'll come back to this page very shortly. However, back on our machine when it was displaying this old message, updates were required, which I'd not installed, so I could show you the old Secure Boot message. But let's now get them installed. There we go, and if we now look in the Windows Security app, we'll first see that nothing has changed, as for many Secure Boot related updates, a second reboot is required. So let's do that, and return to Windows Security, where now, even though Secure Boot has a green tick, we get a new message which states Secure Boot is on, but your device is using an older boot trust configuration that should be updated. According to Microsoft, this message means that Windows may need to perform further updates, or that another reboot is required. At this point, I went off to have a nice cup of tea, and when I returned 20 minutes later and had rebooted again, the message had updated to include there is not yet enough data to classify your device for automatic update. According to Microsoft, this means that a computer may need additional validation. However, in practice, this message usually seems to mean that you need to wait for the new certificate updates to be rolled out to your particular hardware configuration. And indeed, if you see an older boot trust configuration message, my advice is to wait to see if Windows Update sorts things out. And on this machine, this is also exactly what happened, as 6 days later I got the message that the new certificates have been applied and everything is okay. Whilst making this video, I've asked a lot of people what secure boot status messages they were receiving. And I've found out that many people have had to wait for several days in the intermediate state. However, in the vast majority of cases, Windows Update did sort things out without the user having to do anything other than be patient for a few planetary rotations. This said, in some cases, a computer's UEFI firmware may be unable to accept the new certificates, so a manual update may be required. And I'll cover this in the next part of the video. However, before that, let's return to Microsoft's page about updated secure boot status messages, where, as we can see, it's possible that you may see an amber or red warning. As described below, this can signal that your secure boot certificates are fully updated, not yet updated, or that automatic updates are not supported. If we scroll down further and open things up, we can see 6 possible status messages, the first of which is for fully complete, whilst the second is one of the older boot trust messages we've just seen. There's then another possible message that reports if updates are paused by a known issue that will automatically resolve, which is followed by the second older boot trust message we've just seen. Finally, there are 2 possible messages that you may get if automated secure boot update is not supported on your computer. So, what if you get a message saying that automatic updates are not supported? Or if you get stuck with an older boot trust message that won't advance to the final stage? Well, in the first circumstance and possibly in the second, you may need to perform a firmware update. I personally had a machine that seemed to be stuck with an older boot trust message, although in time it may have updated automatically. But I decided to update its firmware both to demonstrate the process in this video and because I'm impatient. However, I would stress that there is always a small risk when updating a computer's UEFI firmware, or what many motherboard manufacturers still refer to as its BIOS. And this risk is that you may brick your motherboard and render it unusable. Assuming that you do decide to perform a firmware update, it's important to note that the exact process does vary between manufacturers and hardware. And so, whilst I'm about to give you a demonstration, things may well look different on your system. But for a desktop PC, the basic process is usually to download a new BIOS file from your motherboard manufacturer's website and then to enter the BIOS and flash this to the motherboard. To do this, I first visited the web pages for my motherboard, where I went to Support and under BIOS downloaded the latest available file to a USB drive that must be formatted FAT32. Next, I went to the USB drive and extracted the downloaded zip file in the same location. And, depending on your motherboard, this may or may not be necessary. But personally, I always unzip BIOS downloads as it avoids having to come back and do it later if required. Next, I rebooted the computer, entered its BIOS by pressing in my case the F2 key, and clicked to enter QFlash, which is the firmware update utility on a Gigabyte motherboard. Here, I then selected the new BIOS file that I downloaded to the USB drive, confirmed that I wanted to update the BIOS, and waited for the file to be verified. Finally, I clicked Start, accepted the required reboot, and whilst waiting nervously, I crossed my fingers that the latest firmware update did include the new Secure Boot certificates. After the system successfully restarted, over in the Windows Secuirty app, nothing had changed. So I performed a second reboot, and here we are. The new certificates are installed and no further ones are needed. For me, a firmware update therefore worked to get the new certificates more rapidly than via Windows Update. However, this may not always be the case, and you may still need to wait for further Windows Update activity to get the new certificates. It just depends on whether the BIOS update actually includes the new certificates or just enables their installation. Right, let's turn to Linux. And it's worth remembering that Secure Boot certificates are stored in a computer's NVRAM. So if you have a dual boot setup, it doesn't matter if Windows or Linux installs the new certificates. Just as in Windows, expired Secure Boot certificates should not stop a Linux system from booting, although it may not be possible to do a new install with Secure Boot active if you don't have the new certificates. Fortunately, many distros are providing the new certificates via their standard software updater. For example, when I recently looked at Fedora 44, by chance I managed to capture this screen where the new certificates were just a few clicks away. To check on your Secure Boot status and if you have the new certificates, in Linux we can use the mock or machine owner keys utility. Specifically, we can enter this command to find out if Secure Boot is enabled or disabled. So here we go, and there we are, it is enabled on this system. To find out which certificates are installed, we can also use mokutil to check what's stored in the Secure Boot Authorized Signature Database, or DB, or the Key Enrollment Database, or KEK, as I discussed earlier. Let's start with the latter, where we enter this command, and it lists all the keys. I've started with this command because there are fewer keys. There's only 2 keys here. Let's go right back to the top. You'll see here we have a key 1, and we can see this key is Microsoft Corporation KEK CA 2011, which expires in June 2026. This is the old certificate. But if we scroll down, we will find we've also got key 2, and this is the new one. This is Microsoft Corporation KEK2K CA 2023, and this expires in 2038. Yes, we're going to be doing this all again in 2038. So let's also take a look at DB. Well, first of all, clear the screen to make life a little bit easier, and now execute this again, but with a DB on the end. You can probably guess that. A lot more certificates, and I think we'll make life easy by doing a search for 2038. And there we are. We've found a new certificate there, the Microsoft Option ROM UEFI CA 2023, expiring in 2038. So it's clear on this system we do have the new certificates. And this is not a surprise, as this is the same PC we've been working on in Windows. And sadly, I don't now have a computer left without the new certificates installed and which will accept them without a BIOS update, which is something I've just demonstrated. And therefore, I cannot fully demonstrate for you manual Secure Boot certificate installation in Linux. However, this can be achieved using the firmware update daemon, and I'll demonstrate as much as I can. So let's first of all clear the screen, where we would start by refreshing the firmware metadata. And we do this using this command, firmware update manager refresh, which here just reports everything is up to date. Secondly, having refreshed the metadata, you could check if any updates were available using this command, get updates. And again, on this device, there were no updatable devices. But if there were, you could use the update command, which is this, which if I execute it here, or simply tell us again there are no updatable devices. But if there were, this command should download the new Secure Boot certificate ready to inject into NVRAM on the next reboot. And do remember, 2 reboots are often required. And I will of course list these commands in the video description. For most people, Secure Boot Certificate Expiry will be dealt with automatically and won't cause any issues. However, I would advise checking if you've got the new Secure Boot certificates, and if you haven't, to keep on checking and potentially take manual action. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.